The year was 1962. The world watched as two superpowers stood at the brink of nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis, a 13-day standoff, remains one of the most perilous moments in history. It was a time of fear and uncertainty. At the heart of this crisis was Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Under Fidel Castro, Cuba aligned with the Soviet Union. This alliance became a powder keg. The discovery of Soviet missiles in Cuba sent shockwaves through the American government. President Kennedy faced an unprecedented challenge. The world held its breath. The fate of millions hung in the balance. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a defining moment of the Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis unfolded rapidly, a tense series of events pushing the world closer to the brink of war. It began in October 1962 when American U-2 spy planes captured photographic evidence of Soviet nuclear missile sites under construction in Cuba. These photos, stark and undeniable, revealed the true extent of the Soviet threat. Intermediate-range ballistic missiles capable of reaching Washington, D.C. and other major U.S. cities were being prepared for launch. President Kennedy, faced with this alarming discovery, established a special advisory group, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, or EXCOM. EXCOM, composed of top military and political advisors, was tasked with finding a solution to the crisis, a way to neutralize the threat without sparking a global conflict. Time was of the essence. Every passing hour brought the Soviet missiles closer to operational status, increasing the risk of a catastrophic miscalculation. The world watched and waited, hoping for a peaceful resolution to this terrifying standoff. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a clash of ideologies, a battle of wills between two superpowers vying for global dominance. On one side stood President John F. Kennedy, representing the capitalist West. Kennedy, young and charismatic, was determined to stand firm. On the other side stood Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union. Both leaders found themselves caught in a deadly game of chess. News of the Soviet missiles in Cuba sent shockwaves through the United States, igniting a wave of fear and uncertainty across the nation. The possibility of a nuclear attack, once a distant nightmare, suddenly felt terrifyingly real. Families huddled around their radios and television sets, anxiously absorbing every update on the unfolding crisis. Schools conducted duck-and-cover drills, preparing children for a nuclear blast that everyone hoped would never come. Supermarket shelves were emptied as people stocked up on essential supplies, preparing for the worst. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a collective sense of dread gripping the nation. For 13 long days, Americans lived under the shadow of nuclear war, their lives put on hold as the world waited to see if diplomacy would prevail. Section 5, Guantanamo Bay, a strategic outpost in a sea of uncertainty. In the midst of this global crisis, the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, took on a new and critical significance. Leased to the United States in 1903, Guantanamo Bay, often referred to as Gitmo, had long been a strategic military outpost. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, its importance was amplified. Located just a stone's throw from the Soviet missile sites, Guantanamo Bay became a frontline observation post, a vital source of intelligence on Soviet activities in Cuba. The base was placed on high alert, its defenses reinforced in anticipation of a possible Soviet attack. Thousands of additional troops were deployed to Guantanamo, bolstering its defenses and preparing for any eventuality. Section 6. The importance of Guantanamo. A military perspective. Guantanamo Bay, with its strategic location at the entrance to the Caribbean Sea, was a key asset for the United States during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Its deep water port could accommodate large warships, including aircraft carriers, providing the U.S. Navy with a forward operating base in close proximity to Cuba. The base's airfield, capable of handling large transport planes and bombers, was also a crucial asset. It allowed the United States to quickly deploy troops and equipment to the region, bolstering its military presence and sending a clear message of resolve to the Soviet Union. Guantanamo Bay also served as a vital communication hub, linking Washington, D.C. with its forces in the Caribbean. This constant and secure communication was essential for maintaining command and control during those tense days. Section 7, 13 Days of Terror, Finding a Path to Peace. The Cuban Missile Crisis, though terrifying, ultimately became a testament to the power of diplomacy and the importance of clear communication in averting disaster. For 13 agonizing days, the world watched as Kennedy and Khrushchev engaged in a high-stakes game of brinkmanship. Through a series of tense back-channel negotiations and public pronouncements, both sides cautiously explored paths to de-escalation. Kennedy, heeding the advice of his advisors, resisted calls for an immediate military strike on the missile sites, recognizing that such an action could trigger a nuclear holocaust. Instead, he ordered a naval blockade of Cuba, preventing further Soviet shipments of offensive weapons to the island. This quarantine, as Kennedy termed it, was a calculated risk, a show of force designed to pressure Khrushchev without resorting to outright aggression. Section 8. The Legacy of the Crisis, A World Changed. The Cuban Missile Crisis, though brief, cast a long shadow over international relations. It underscored the terrifying destructive power of nuclear weapons and the need for restraint on the world stage. In the aftermath of the crisis, both the United States and the Soviet Union took steps to reduce tensions and prevent future confrontations. A hotline was established between Washington and Moscow to facilitate direct communication between the two superpowers, ensuring that future crises could be addressed more effectively. This direct line of communication, a symbol of the new era of détente, helped to prevent misunderstandings and reduce the risk of accidental nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis also led to the signing of the Limited Test Ban Treaty in 1963, which banned nuclear weapons tests in the atmosphere, underwater and outer space. This treaty, a significant step towards nuclear disarmament, was a direct result of the heightened awareness of the dangers of nuclear war. Section 9. Echoes of the Cold War, Lessons for the Future. The Cuban Missile Crisis, though a relic of the Cold War, continues to hold valuable lessons for the world today. It reminds us of the fragility of peace, the ever-present danger of escalation, and the need for clear communication and diplomacy in resolving international disputes. In an age of renewed great power competition and the proliferation of nuclear weapons, the lessons of the Cuban Missile Crisis are more relevant than ever. We must remain vigilant in our efforts to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and committed to peaceful resolution of conflicts. The Cuban Missile Crisis serves as a stark reminder that the consequences of failure are too great to bear. We must strive to build a safer and more secure world, free from the threat of nuclear annihilation.